Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to embark on a difficult but incredibly important journey back in time to an era that fundamentally shaped our modern world. We'll be exploring the transatlantic slave trade, a period spanning from the 1500s to the 1800s, focusing on the role of the coastal forts that dotted the shores of West Africa. This is a story of immense human suffering, but also one of incredible resilience and a history that we must understand to make sense of the present. Our story begins in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. European nations, spurred on by the Age of Discovery, were charting new sea routes and establishing contact with continents previously unknown to them. Portugal was at the forefront of this exploration, particularly along the West African coast. Initially, their interest was in gold, ivory, and spices. They established trading posts, small fortified structures, to facilitate this commerce and protect their interests from rival European powers. One of the earliest and most significant of these was Elmina Castle, built in present-day Ghana in 1482. At first it was a hub for the gold trade, but its purpose would soon take a dark and tragic turn. As European powers like Spain and Portugal began colonizing the Americas, they created vast plantations to cultivate sugar, tobacco, cotton, and coffee. These enterprises required a massive labor force. Initially, they attempted to enslave the indigenous populations, but disease and resistance decimated their numbers. The colonists then turned their eyes across the Atlantic, to Africa. This shift marked the beginning of a system that would commodify human beings on an industrial scale. The existing Portuguese trading posts, once centers for goods, were repurposed and expanded. New forts were built not just by the Portuguese, but also by the Dutch, the British, the French, the Danish, and others who wanted a piece of this horrific but profitable trade. These coastal forts became the linchpins of the triangular trade. European ships would sail to Africa laden with manufactured goods, textiles, guns, alcohol, and trinkets. These goods were then traded with local African rulers and merchants for captured people. It's crucial to understand that this wasn't a simple case of Europeans sailing in and kidnapping people. The reality was far more complex. European powers exploited existing rivalries between African kingdoms and ethnic groups, fueling conflicts with the supply of firearms. This created a vicious cycle. More weapons led to more wars, which in turn produced more captives who were then sold to feed the insatiable demand for labor in the Americas. Imagine what it was like for the millions of men, women, and children captured. Torn from their homes, often in violent raids, they were marched for weeks or even months to the coast. Chained together in long lines called coffles, they endured starvation, exhaustion, and brutal treatment. For many, this journey was their first and last taste of the horrors to come. Arriving at the coast, they were confronted by the immense, foreboding stone walls of the slave forts, places like Cape Coast Castle, Elmina Castle, or Gorée Island. To them, these structures must have seemed like the gates of hell itself. Inside these forts, the conditions were beyond appalling. Captives were crammed into dark, airless dungeons, sometimes for months, while they awaited the arrival of the slave ships. Men, women, and children were segregated. The dungeons were often ankle-deep in filth, and disease was rampant. The stench of death and despair was overwhelming. They were branded with hot irons, marking them as the property of a particular trading company or buyer. They were subjected to humiliating inspections and constant violence. The governors of these forts held absolute power, and abuse was commonplace. The infamous Door of No Return, a feature of many of these castles, was the final portal through which these individuals passed from their homeland onto the slave ships, leaving Africa behind forever. Looking out from that door, all they could see was the vast, unforgiving ocean. The next stage of this journey was the Middle Passage, the transatlantic voyage to the Americas. This journey could last anywhere from 6 weeks to several months, depending on the weather and destination. The conditions aboard the slave ships were even more horrific than in the dungeons. People were packed onto low shelves below deck, chained and unable to sit or stand upright. The space was so tight they were forced to lie in the filth of their neighbors. The heat was suffocating, the air unbreathable. Disease, particularly dysentery and smallpox, spread like wildfire. The mortality rate was staggering. It's estimated that between 10 and 20% of all captives died during the Middle Passage. Those who resisted were met with extreme brutality. It was a journey defined by unimaginable suffering and a complete stripping away of human dignity. Upon arrival in the Americas, in Brazil, the Caribbean, or the North American colonies, the ordeal was far from over. The survivors of the Middle Passage were taken to auction blocks, where they were sold like livestock. Families and people from the same communities were deliberately torn apart to break their spirits and prevent organized rebellion. They were then forced into a life of hard labor on plantations or in mines, under the constant threat of the whip. Their lives were not their own. They were property, with no rights, no freedom, and little hope of ever seeing their homes again. The system of chattel slavery that developed in the Americas was a brutal institution that lasted for centuries. Yet, in the face of this dehumanization, the enslaved people resisted. They resisted in countless ways, through open revolts, by running away, by preserving their cultural traditions, music and languages in secret, and through acts of everyday defiance. They created new communities and cultures, blending African traditions with new influences, laying the groundwork for the vibrant and diverse African diaspora cultures we see today across the Americas. Their spirit could not be entirely broken. The decline of the slave trade began in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. A growing abolitionist movement, driven by moral, religious, and economic arguments, gained momentum in Europe and the Americas. People like Olaudah Equiano, a formerly enslaved man whose autobiography became a powerful tool for the movement, exposed the horrors of the trade to a wider public. In 1807, Britain abolished the slave trade, and its Royal Navy began patrolling the African coast to intercept slave ships. Other European nations followed suit, though illegal smuggling continued for decades. Slavery itself would not be abolished in the United States until 1865, and in Brazil until 1888. The legacy of these 400 years is profound and far-reaching. The depopulation and constant warfare destabilized West and Central Africa for generations. In the Americas, the legacy is seen in the deep-seated racial inequalities that persist to this day. But it's also seen in the incredible contributions of the African diaspora to art, music, literature, science, and every facet of society. Today, the slave forts on the coast of Ghana and Senegal stand as solemn UNESCO World Heritage Sites. They are powerful, haunting reminders of this dark chapter in human history. They serve as places of pilgrimage and reflection, ensuring that we never forget the millions of lives that were stolen and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. Understanding this history is not about assigning blame. It's about acknowledging the truth of our shared past and recognizing how it continues to shape our world. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care.